and welcome back again, people. Thank you for joining the channel. This one's a bit about fossil fuel. Oh, I know. Don't worry too much, it's not that bad. I brought this one up because there's a lot of talk around the industry at the moment about the Japanese car manufacturers. They seem to be in a bit of a quagmire, a bit of a mess. Now this has become about because over the years of making fossil car after fossil car, they're knowing around, let's say 6, 7, 8, even 10 years ago that the EV revolution was taking place. There was only one car manufacturer that did anything about it, and that was Nissan. Now, some people may joke about that early Nissan Leaf, but that will become a super classic car to have and own. And I say this because it was one of the first. Now, we think of classic cars at the moment of being 66 fastback Mustangs, or Ford Granadas Mark 1s, or Vauxhall Vivas, or Rileys, or even worse, you know, Morris Marina. Oh dear, really tasted that. I don't see early classic cars lasting much longer as we transition into full EV land. No one's going to want them, no one's going to bother to be seen with them. The shows will start diluting because there'll be less and less of them, and the only real good ones will end up in museums. Anyway, I digress. What's happened to the Japanese manufacturing base is that they have created so much debt of not wanting change that their debts are so huge now they cannot afford to transition over into making EV styles. This is going to hold them back. So that's the basic of this one. Legacy car makers, especially Japanese, have had it very, very good for many decades. When the first Japanese cars hit the USA in the early 70s, they were seen as a gas saviour. The gas shortage in America, or fuel, fossil fuel, when people say gas, sorry my UK viewers, I always call it gas now, but the petrol, okay, petroleum products. When it became a high expensive product and a hard to get product, when the oil shortage happened in the early 70s, the Japanese were the first to have a small eco car doing 35 to the gallon, which was an amazing thing to get back then. When you consider that the average American car was doing no more than 10, 12, 13 miles per gallon, people were looking at the smaller Japanese cars. It didn't help also for the American car market because they were just going through a large transition over to emissions. They were basically on top of the world when it came to emission controls in the early 70s and even through the 70s up to the early 80s. They were putting things like ECUs on cars. They were putting sensors on cars, emission sensors and everything else. And so it made their V8s that should blow out good 400 brake horsepower, limiting them to about 165, 170 brake horse. And the torque figures were just a joke. With this in mind, when you get a 1.6 or a 1.8 small Japanese lightweight car, little hatchback thing come on board, and it was seeing off V8s from traffic lights and still giving you 30, 35 miles per gallon, you can see why they sold. By now, the Japanese car market had boomed worldwide. Toyota had become #1 bestseller. Then I think it was Nissan, Honda, and even Subaru. This brings us up to the early to mid 80s now, and by the late 80s there were a mass of Japanese car brands like this. In America they started to make smaller cars with smaller engines, and let's face it, they were pushed by the US government to have a certain criteria of emissions down to a certain number per company. So they still had the big V8 roaring away, but they had a lot of smaller cars. And what happened was, in the American market, Mitsubishi became part of one American company. I believe it was Mazda that got bought out by Ford, and there was lots of other going-ons. Basically, they were just having Japanese cars made under their own brands to keep the emission numbers down. Okay, so they didn't get fined multi-millions of pounds. That did happen to Ford, and it did happen to GM. Not sure about the Chrysler Corporation. Moving on to Chrysler, they did actually make their own 2.2 K-code cars. I had 2 or 3 of them here in the UK. They were quite rare in the UK, because if you bought an American car, you normally only bought it for the V8 or the V6 powerhouse and the noise and the smell and everything else. I had them as grocery getters. My wife had one, I had one. Even towed with one for a while, and these were 2.2 litre 4-cylinder Chrysler cars, K-code. I'll put one here, look. That's a K-code car. Yeah, things like that. They were very plasticky inside, very lightweight, very tinny, mass-produced, cheap cars, purely to compete with the Japanese import sector. As time went on through the 80s and into the early 90s, Japanese cars were actually being made in the USA. This was the next way to keep up with the law. Now, I believe it was Tennessee had a massive, and still have a massive, Nissan factory down in the south of the US. And as this was happening, we here in the UK were doing the same. Nissan came across, Honda came across, and Toyotas were being built in the USA, even with V8s. What a turnaround, eh? So imagine you had this early 70s, mid 70s import of little cheap cars, okay, that everyone hated in America but bought them. And then 10 to 15 years later, the whole thing had been turned round, where the Japanese car section were making V8 pickup trucks called the Tundra. What was that all about? So they got in by luck, in my eyes, into the US, into the Western world, because of petrol shortages and oil prices. That's the only reason why I think Japanese cars sold to begin with. Okay, like I said, I've had a few Japanese cars. I had a very large Toyota in blue, 4-door thing, one of these. Yeah, that thing, it was the first car I ever known to have a little fridge in the trunk, in the boot. Held about 8 Pepsis or whatever car, whatever small cans. But yeah, that thing there, that blew up. It blew up on a major A road, doing about 70, 72, whatever. Boom! Oil all over the place. Cost me a fortune to get it towed back. I scrapped it at the end, but the bodywork of it was superb, and it was a very, very loaded vehicle. But anyway, again, I'll move on. By now, we're heading towards 2000 plus, and the Japanese car industry was booming, absolutely booming, worldwide. Toyota was the best, I wouldn't say the best, but Toyota was the biggest selling car manufacturer, beating GM, Ford and everything else from the heydays of the 60s, which to a lot of Americans annoyed them. But by now, like I say, they were manufacturing them in America, creating jobs and a bit of wealth for the American marketplace. So very cool, that's how they got around it. So you will come across some Toyotas made in the USA. Up rolls 2010. In 2010, the Nissan Leaf. Yep, that one there. I've owned one, my son's owned one. And I'm going to stick my neck out here, and they are still great cars. Have a laugh and a joke if you want to. Put a smiley face, laughing emoji like most ignorant people do. If you don't like the Nissan Leaf, I can understand it. It weren't the best looking thing, but my God, was it futuristic for its time. I bought one for my wife. It was a 24 kilowatt in grey. It was the Techno version, so I had all the toys on it, sat nav and Bose system and all the rest of it. And I paid about 8 grand for it. I sold it a year on, put about 8,000 mile on it, 10,000 mile on it, and I still sold it for £600 profit. My son had one. He had the 30 kilowatt, but he had a bit of a battery drain off that one. He'd lost a couple of bars off the dash, which means that his battery was starting to degrade. But he was still getting nearly 100 mile in the summer on a charge from his Nissan Leaf. The Nissan Leaf upset the marketplace because as soon as it came out, 75% of the legacy brands laughed it off. Nissan, what have you done? Why you done this? It won't take off. It's nothing. Blah, blah, blah. 25% saw something in it. That 25% that saw something in it got a bit questioning, saying, well, hold on. This is taking off. It's selling a few units. If this is the future, we better start looking at this. So basically, the electric car was born. Thank you, Nissan. Hooray! Renault were one of the 25% that stood back and thought, hold on here. This is going to happen. So they did get involved, but today we're talking about the Japanese car manufacturing base. So when these others started coming on board, by now you've got that hybrid thing. Toyota had been making this hybrid now since the Toyota Prius. I've had a Mark II Prius and I've had a Mark III Prius. A 2005 and a 2010. A 2010, that's right. Bought it for the wife. We were getting about 52 to the gallon out of things. But they were boring. You know, they were still burning fuel. They were still using oil. Still a big 1.8 engine in the front of the damn thing. So I was glad to see the back of it, and I would never ever have another hybrid. But Toyota, let's pick on Toyota here. They were loving this thing because it was their tech, which was great back in the day 15 years ago, was keeping them alive. And it was their little take on what an electric car should be. But this is where they failed miserably. By now, people were looking at BEVs, full electric vehicles with no fossil fuel engine in the front. A battery electric vehicle. The Japanese, especially Toyota, took no notice of this and carried on, creating hybrids. There was Honda as well, who had their hybrid car, and now Nissan also, for some strange reason, after making the Leaf and having this technology, came out with the Nissan Qashqai about 2 years ago, which was also a hybrid. And there's been loads of hybrids chucked on the market. This is the way to do it, self-charging, all the rest of it. No, you're still using a fossil fuel engine. You're still burning oil. You're still having to buy petrol, gas, whatever you call it. But the Japanese car industry did not see this happening. They took no aversive action to create a better EV from Nissan or Toyota to come out with their first one. No, what did Toyota do? They made a hydrogen car, the Mira. Yeah, this thing here. This was so boring, James May bought one from Top Gear. I'll end it there. Let's bring it up to date now. If you really give it some deep thought, there is only Nissan that's gone forward slightly with a new EV, which has been out, the Ariya, which has been out about a year now. But they've carried on making the Nissan Leaf, and they made a Mark II version, which wasn't a bad looking car when they did that. The problem is, they kept all the inside switchgear and everything else and just transferred it over to the new one. And I think that kind of like made the Nissan Leaf Mark II a bit of a slug. Toyota, on the other hand, have took years to come out with a full EV that's still been in mass production. The BZ4849, or the BZ, but what a stupid name for it. Anyway, it's there, it's this thing. Yep, when this hit, what happened? Within about a week or two of actually selling a few, and it was a few, wheel nuts started falling off. Wheels had the chance of coming off. Toyota, what have you done? Anyway, they kind of recalled them all and got it right, and now Subaru are selling exactly the same vehicle with Subaru badges on it as their electric car. Ask yourself why. Because Subaru cannot afford to create their own electric vehicle. Now, the CEO of Toyota about 2 years ago said, we are going to stick with what we've got. We don't see electric cars being the future. So he kind of like kicked himself in the ghoulies by doing that, the CEO at the time. Now since then, he's been replaced. It makes you wonder if he got kicked out or he was just asked to go. Some young whippersnappers come up and said that EVs are the future, and we're going to create about 7 EVs before 2025. Well, Toyota, where's your money going to come from? The figures of debt that Toyota are carrying, billions and billions, we're talking 200 billion plus, cannot be repaid, even if they sold everything now. They are a car company that is in dire straits. Mazda is going the same way. Honda, with only one EV out at the moment, is going the same way. And let me just go back to Mazda. They've got one EV out really in mass production, and it's pretty rubbish. The range is rubbish. It's not designed great. It's not been selling superb. They have problems. Honda, they came out with that little retro looking Honda. Great little car. Yeah, that one there. I've got an issue with that. Loved all the screens in the front of it, as you can see. Super duper. But what's happened? They have no more. They've done nothing else. Why? Ask yourself why. They've got no money. They're in debt. They are carrying so much debt. It's unreal. I can't think of one Japanese car manufacturer that is not in dire straits. They cannot even evolve themselves and transition to what is the future. And all you deniers out there who are looking at me going, what a idiot. I'm telling you now, electric or some form of non-fossil fuel power is the future. And at the minute, there's nothing else to beat electric. Simple. Let's just spin this round on its head. Tesla. Everyone called Mr. Musk. Everyone calls him now. A lot of haters out there for Elon. Think of his business structure. Okay, he has played some blinders and bought people out and got big, input of money at times from the US government and blah, blah, blah. And loads of people have done that and loads of people have failed. Mr. Elon Musk, who I'm not a super fan of, has actually created a car brand called Tesla, along with someone else back in the day. He don't make it, he don't produce it, he doesn't work on the production lines, he doesn't design anything, but he has the backing of the ideas from people. Tesla are now selling cars, undercutting most of the new top EVs coming onto the marketplace, and still making $6,000 or $7,000 on each car. Ford, for example, who are now making a few EVs, are making next to nothing. They lost $1 billion last year because of the money they've had to put in to the transition of EVs. Every single Japanese are in the same quagmire. What's going to happen? And I'll bring something else up here as well, which is going to shock the motor trade, which everyone knows is going to happen. China. That's what Mr. Trump used to say. China. The Chinese are ready to kick ass over legacy automakers. It's already happening. Already happening. So to summarise this, where does it go? What happens? Tesla are making a fortune on every car it sells. And it has zero debt. As a car company of, say, only what? How old is it now? 10, 12 years old? It's now selling above 4 million cars since it started as a startup company. It makes Toyota, Mazda, Mitsubishi, Subaru, Honda, and everyone else out of Japan look absolutely stupid. It's getting more and more contracts with Chinese battery manufacturers. The Japanese are leaving it far too late to catch up. Some will go bust. Some legacy automakers from Japan are going to have to split their companies up into their electric side and their fossil fuel car side. The fossil fuel car side will only be a 10-year max business, because by then the EV business will have expanded and basically eaten the fossil fuel car business into oblivion. It won't be there anymore. But I think they'll have to split it for tax purposes and debts and everything else. So just watch this space. Hey, I'd be very, very iffy of buying a hybrid car now, a Japanese hybrid car. Because if one does go under and you just bought that car, you've lost your warranty and everything. So be very, very wary of what you're buying. Stay off the hybrid scene. If you're going to go anything electric or even touch it, just buy a full electric car. I'm not just saying Tesla. There's some good ones out there, some excellent ones, some better than Tesla in certain quarters. You don't need to buy anything that's Japanese and anything that's hybrid or even fossil fuel. Stay away from them, people. Watch this space. Watch the changes that's going to happen, because I think the Japanese car industry is down for a fall. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for watching. If you're not subscribed, please do. I say it every time. Where have you been? Subscribe to the channel. Plenty more to come. In about 2 days' time, I'm off to the USA on the Big Bird. Yes, I know I'm polluting the earth, but I've got to do it. It's the only way I can get there. There's no electric planes yet. But if I had the choice, I'd choose the electric one. So I'm out of here. I'm really looking forward to this road trip we're doing. It will be on the channel in about 4 different posts all over parts of the southwest USA. So keep happy, folks. Spring's on the way. Summer's right next door. We'll go from there. Just don't buy a Japanese car. See you later.